When he saw her sitting on that sidewalk, something inside him shattered. She was his brother's wife, his dead brother's wife, a woman with a degree from Boston University, now selling her wedding ring in the cold for the price of a meal. He hadn't seen her in years. He believed she was safe. She wasn't, and the reason she was there, hungry, forgotten, alone on that concrete, was him. His choice, his fault. But what he did next wasn't what anyone expected. He didn't offer her money. It was something far deeper, and no one saw it coming. The woman was trying to sell her wedding ring, not at a jewelry counter, not in some clean pawn shop with fluorescent lighting and printed receipts. She was sitting on a folded piece of cardboard outside a bodega on Atlantic Avenue, holding the ring in her open palm like a communion wafer, and the December wind was making her fingers shake so badly that the thin gold band kept slipping toward the edge of her hand. She had a cardboard sign propped against her knee. It read, 14-karat gold, real, $40. The ring was worth $600 minimum. She was asking $40 because $40 would buy her a bed tonight. One of those cots at the women's shelter on Fulton Street. The one that still had open spots if you got in line before 5. She had learned that math months ago. The math of what things are worth versus what things cost when you are running out of time. Her name was Vivian Calloway. She was 31 years old. She had a degree in comparative literature from Boston University. She had once hosted dinner parties where she paired wine with the conversation topics. She had once slow danced in a kitchen in Bay Ridge while her husband sang off-key to a Sinatra record. Now she was sitting on cardboard, and she had not eaten since yesterday morning, and the skin on her knuckles was cracked from the cold, and no one was stopping. Across the street, a black SUV idled at the curb. The man in the back seat had not intended to be on Atlantic Avenue today. His driver had taken a detour to avoid construction on 4th, and Rafferty Malone had been looking at his phone, scrolling through a thread of messages he did not want to answer, when something caught the corner of his eye and held it. A woman on the sidewalk, dark hair, thin coat, a posture he recognized, not from the streets but from somewhere older, somewhere buried. He lowered his phone, stopped the car. His driver, a thick-necked man named Petrov, glanced in the mirror. "Boss!" "Stop the car, Petrov." The SUV pulled to the curb. Rafferty did not get out. He sat there, watching through tinted glass, and the recognition landed on him like a physical weight. Not sudden, but slow, the way a wave builds before it breaks. Vivian, his brother's wife, his dead brother's wife, the woman Callum had married in that crooked little church in Red Hook 8 years ago, the one with the stained glass window that was missing a panel. The woman who had stood at the funeral in a black dress that did not fit her properly because she had already started losing weight from the grief. The woman who had looked at Rafferty across the casket with an expression that was not anger, not sorrow, but something worse, the flat, exhausted recognition that he had failed her and that she had expected nothing different. That was 4 years ago. He had not seen her since. He had told himself, in the years after Callum's death, that Vivian was fine, that she had family, that she had her education, her resourcefulness, her stubborn, sharp-edged pride. He had told himself these things because the alternative, that she was drowning and that he had watched her go under, was a truth he could not afford to carry on top of everything else. Now she was sitting on a piece of cardboard, trying to sell her wedding ring for $40, and every lie he had told himself was sitting there with her. Rafferty opened the door. The wind hit him first, then the smell of the street, exhaust, damp concrete, the sweet rot of an overturned garbage can. He crossed Atlantic Avenue without looking, and a cab honked, and he did not flinch, because Rafferty Malone had not flinched at anything in a very long time. He was 43 years old. He ran the Malone organization, which operated out of South Brooklyn and controlled a network of construction contracts, waterfront real estate, and protection arrangements that had been built by his father and inherited through blood and silence. He was feared by men who feared very little. He had gray at his temples and a scar on his jaw from a night in Sunset Park that no one discussed. None of that mattered now. He stopped 3 feet from the cardboard, close enough to see the ring in her palm. Close enough to see the veins standing out on her wrist. Too visible. Too blue. Close enough to see that her coat, a thin wool thing, charcoal gray, had been mended at the shoulder with thread that did not match. Vivian looked up. The recognition was not instant for her. It came in stages, confusion, then focus, then a slow tightening of her jaw that started at the hinge and worked its way to her mouth. Her eyes, dark brown, almost black, the kind of eyes that had once made Callum say she could read your sins through your skull, went flat. "No," she said, not a question, a verdict. Rafferty stood there. He had rehearsed nothing because he had expected nothing, and now his mouth was empty of every useful word. "Vivian." "Walk away, Rafferty." Her voice was lower than he remembered. Rougher. It had the texture of disuse, of someone who had gone days without speaking to another person. But it was controlled. Even now, sitting on cardboard, visibly starving, holding a ring that should have been locked in a jewelry box in a warm apartment, she was controlled. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't. That's the problem." She closed her fist around the ring. "You didn't know because you didn't look." He absorbed that. He did not defend himself. There was no defense available. "Let me help you." "Help?" She said the word like it tasted wrong. "You want to help me?" 4 years later, on a Tuesday, in December. "Yes." "Why?" He did not have a good answer, or rather he had too many answers and none of them were clean. "Because you are my brother's wife. Because you are freezing. Because I owe you a debt that has been growing interest for 4 years, and the balance is so high I cannot calculate it. Because I looked out a car window and saw you. And the ground shifted under me and I am trying to figure out if it has shifted back. Because I should have done it 4 years ago," he said. Vivian stared at him for a long time. A bus went past. The bodega door opened and closed behind them, letting out a brief rectangle of warmth and the smell of coffee. "I don't want your guilt money," she said. "I'm not offering money." "Then what are you offering?" "A room, food, time to figure out your next move." She laughed. It was a small, dry sound without humor. "A room, in your house?" "Yes." "The house that Callum said was a fortress, the house that runs on secrets and silence. You want me to live there?" "I want you to eat a meal and sleep in a bed, tonight. That's what I want right now." Vivian looked at the ring in her fist. She looked at Rafferty's shoes, black, polished, expensive, the shoes of a man who had never wondered where he would sleep. She looked back at his face, and whatever she was searching for, she did not find it, because her expression did not soften. "If I come with you," she said very quietly, "it is not forgiveness. It is not reconciliation. It is not the beginning of some redemption story you're writing for yourself in your head. I understand. I don't think you do, but I'm too cold to argue." She stood up. She was thinner than he had calculated from a distance, her collarbone visible through the neck of her sweater, her wrists narrow enough that a man could circle them with his thumb and forefinger. She folded the piece of cardboard with the precision of someone who had learned to value even garbage, and she tucked it under her arm. "You're bringing the cardboard," Rafferty said. "I'm bringing everything I own," Vivian said. "Which, at this point, is the cardboard." She walked past him toward the SUV without waiting for him to lead. She opened the door herself. She got in and sat, as far from the center of the back seat as physics allowed, pressing her shoulder against the window, and she did not speak again for the entire drive. Rafferty sat on the other side and watched the city pass, and the space between them, 3 feet of leather upholstery, felt wider than any distance he had ever known. The house was in Bay Ridge, on a tree-lined street where the brownstones had been bought and renovated with money that did not bear close inspection. Rafferty's residence occupied the largest of them, a 4-story building with a wrought iron gate and a small garden that his mother had planted before she died, and that no one had been able to bring themselves to remove. Vivian stood on the sidewalk and looked at it the way you look at a place you have seen in photographs, but never expected to visit. Callum had described the house to her. He had told her about the kitchen where their mother made Sunday gravy, the study on the third floor where their father held meetings that children were not allowed to hear. He had told her these things, with a mix of nostalgia and revulsion that she had never fully understood until now, standing in front of the building and understanding that it was beautiful in the way that things built on difficult foundations are beautiful, structurally sound, aesthetically precise, and quietly haunted. "The guest room is on the second floor," Rafferty said behind her. "Private bathroom, lock on the door." "A lock. You'll have the key." "No one else." She turned and looked at him. For the first time since the sidewalk, something shifted in her expression. Not warmth, not gratitude, but a grudging acknowledgement that he had anticipated the right concern. "Fine," she said. Inside, the house was warmer than she had expected, not just in temperature, but in texture. Dark wood floors, heavy curtains, a kitchen that smelled like coffee and something herbal, rosemary maybe, or thyme. A woman in her 60s was standing at the stove, and she turned when they entered, and her eyes went from Rafferty to Vivienne and back again with the alert efficiency of someone who was accustomed to processing information quickly and without asking questions. "Nora," Rafferty said. "This is Vivienne. She'll be staying in the guest room." Nora nodded once. "I'll put fresh sheets on. She needs to eat first." Nora looked at Vivienne properly then, and whatever she saw, the hollowed cheeks, the thin coat, the cardboard tucked under one arm, she absorbed it without reaction. "Soup," she said. "And bread. I'll bring it up." "I can eat in the kitchen," Vivienne said. It was the first thing she had said since the car. "I don't need room service." Nora glanced at Rafferty. He gave a small nod. "Sit wherever you like," Nora said. Vivienne sat at the kitchen table. Nora set a bowl of minestrone in front of her, thick with beans and vegetables, with a heel of crusty bread on the side. Vivienne picked up the spoon, and her hand was steady, and she ate slowly, not because she was savoring it, but because she had learned that eating too fast, after hunger, made you sick. Rafferty stood in the doorway and watched, and the watching was its own kind of punishment, because every controlled spoonful was evidence of a survival she should never have needed to learn. He left her to eat. Upstairs in his study, he sat in the chair behind his desk and pressed his palms against the surface of the wood and breathed. The desk had been his father's. The chair had been his father's. The weight on his chest was his alone. Callum. His brother had been 2 years younger, lighter in every way. Lighter laugh, lighter step, lighter conscience. Callum had never wanted the business. He had wanted a normal life, and he had nearly built one. He married Vivienne. He got a job managing a bookshop in Park Slope. He stopped answering calls from associates. He cut himself out of the family operation, the way you cut a thread from a garment, carefully, hoping the rest would hold. It did not hold. The circumstances of Callum's death were simple in summary and devastating in detail. 4 years ago, Rafferty had been negotiating a territorial dispute with the Pavlovich family, a Russian outfit that controlled a stretch of the waterfront. The negotiations had soured. There were threats. Rafferty had increased security around his own properties, his own people. He had not increased security around Callum, because Callum had been out. Callum was civilian. Callum was safe. The Pavlovich people did not see it that way. They took Callum on a Thursday evening outside the bookshop while he was locking up. They held him for 2 days. The demand was simple. Rafferty would cede 3 waterfront blocks and a construction contract worth $12 million. Rafferty refused, not immediately, not callously. He refused because his advisors told him that conceding would trigger a cascade. Every family in the borough would see weakness, and the Malones would spend the next decade fending off escalations. He refused because the strategic calculus said that capitulation would cost more lives in the long run than holding the line. He refused, and then he mobilized. He sent his best people. He called in favors. He worked every channel he had. They found Callum on Saturday morning in a warehouse in Red Hook. He had been dead for approximately 6 hours. The coroner said the cause was blunt force trauma to the head, a beating that had gone wrong, or perhaps had gone exactly right, depending on which side of the equation you were standing on. Rafferty had made the phone call to Vivian himself. He had stood in his study, this desk, and he had dialed her number, and when she answered, her voice cheerful and unsuspecting, asking if Callum was coming home for dinner, he had told her that her husband was dead. He had not told her why. He had not told her about the negotiation, the refusal, the strategic calculus. He had said that Callum had been killed in an act of violence related to the family business, and that the people responsible would be dealt with, and that she should not worry about safety, and that he was sorry. She had been silent for 11 seconds. He had counted. Then she had said very clearly, he was out, and they still came for him. Yes, because of you. He had not answered because the answer was yes, and he could not say it. After the funeral, Vivian had disappeared. Not dramatically. She did not flee or make a scene. She simply stopped being reachable. Her phone number changed. Her apartment in Park Slope was vacated. The few mutual contacts who might have known her whereabouts said she had gone to stay with a cousin in New Jersey, and Rafferty had accepted that explanation because accepting it was easier than the alternative. Now he knew the alternative. The alternative was cardboard on Atlantic Avenue and a wedding ring for $40. He sat in his father's chair and pressed his palms against his father's desk and understood, with the dull clarity of a man who has run out of ways to lie to himself, that he had killed his brother and then abandoned his brother's wife, and that no amount of territory or money or power could buy back the years she had spent arriving at that sidewalk. The first week was silence. Vivienne stayed in the guest room. She came down for meals, always to the kitchen, always sitting in the same chair, the one closest to the back door, as if she wanted to be reminded that she could leave. She ate what Nora prepared. She thanked Nora. She did not thank Rafferty. She did not speak to Rafferty at all, except when logistics required it. I need a toothbrush. There are supplies in the bathroom cabinet. The cabinet is locked. I'll have Nora unlock it. Fine. Conversations like that. Functional, minimal, stripped of anything that might accidentally create connection. Vivienne was precise about it in a way that told Rafferty she was doing it on purpose, maintaining the boundary, not out of pettiness, but out of necessity. The way someone recovering from a burn avoids heat. He respected it. He gave her space. He left for work in the mornings before she came downstairs, and returned in the evenings after she had gone back to her room. When their paths crossed in the hallway, he stepped aside. When she was in the kitchen, he went to his study. He had told her this was not about redemption, and he was trying to prove it by becoming invisible in his own house. It was Nora who breached the wall, without trying. On the 8th day, Vivian came downstairs and found Nora struggling to open a jar of tomato sauce, her hands curled with arthritis. Without a word, Vivian took the jar, twisted the lid, and set it on the counter. "Thank you," Nora said. "These hands used to open anything." "My grandmother had the same problem," Vivian said. "She used a rubber band around the lid. Gives you grip." Nora looked at her. "Smart woman, your grandmother. Practical. She survived the Depression in a tenement in Dorchester. She could make a meal out of an onion and an opinion." Nora laughed, a real laugh, not a polite one. "Sit down. I'm making gravy. You can tell me about her." Vivian hesitated. Rafferty could see it from the hallway, where he was standing in his coat, having just come through the front door. He could see the calculation behind her eyes, the risk of connection, the danger of comfort, weighed against the simple human pull of a warm kitchen and someone willing to listen. She sat down. Over the next hour, while Nora cooked and Vivian talked, Rafferty stood in the hallway and listened to a voice he had not heard in this register before. Not the flat, controlled tone she used with him, but something warmer, something that rose and fell with the natural rhythm of a person who had once been comfortable in the world. She talked about her grandmother. She talked about growing up in Dorchester. She talked about the winter her grandmother taught her to make bread pudding from stale baguettes, and how the kitchen smelled like vanilla and nutmeg, and how she had never been able to replicate the recipe because her grandmother measured everything by hand and refused to write anything down. He stood there until his legs hurt, and then he went upstairs without announcing himself, because to walk into the kitchen would be to end the thing he was hearing, and he would rather ache than silence it. The second week, the silence began to crack, not between Vivian and Rafferty. That wall remained. But Vivian's presence in the house began to expand. Beyond the guest room and the kitchen chair, he found a book on the study's shelf with a bookmark he did not recognize, a folded receipt from a bodega placed at the beginning of chapter 4 of a Chekhov collection. He found the back door unlocked one morning and discovered footprints in the frozen garden, small, leading to the bench under the bare dogwood tree that his mother had planted. She was reading his books. She was sitting in his mother's garden. She was occupying the spaces he had left empty, and the house, which had been his fortress for years, was beginning to feel like something else, not invaded, inhabited. On the 14th day, he came home late, past midnight. A meeting in Red Hook had run long, and his jaw was tight from the effort of holding conversations he despised. He walked in through the kitchen entrance, expecting darkness, and found the light over the stove on, and Vivian sitting at the table with a mug of tea and the Chekhov. She looked up. She did not close the book. "You read Chekhov," he said. "I have a degree in comparative literature. I read everything." He moved to the counter, poured himself a glass of water, stood with his back to the sink and drank it. And the room was quiet, except for the tick of the clock above the stove and the sound of a page turning. "Callum told me you didn't read," she said. "Callum was wrong about a lot of things. He said you thought books were a waste of time." "I said that once, when I was 22. He never let it go." A silence. Then, very faintly, the corner of her mouth moved, not a smile, the shadow of one, the ghost of an expression that might have been a smile if the conditions were different. "He wouldn't," she said. "He loved a grudge. He was gifted at them." Another silence, but this one was different. This one had texture, the texture of two people acknowledging a shared loss without naming it, the way you might acknowledge a storm by talking about the weather afterward. "I'm going to bed," Vivian said. She stood and picked up her mug and the book. At the doorway, she paused. "The Chekhov is good. You have taste. Don't tell anyone. It'll ruin my reputation." She did not smile, but she did not smile. She left, and Rafferty stood in the kitchen holding his glass of water, and for the first time in 14 days, the space between them felt like it might have a boundary rather than an abyss. The micro-moments accumulated. A morning where Vivian was already in the kitchen when he came down, and instead of leaving, she poured him a cup of coffee without being asked, and set it on the counter, and went back to her book without a word. An afternoon where he found her in the garden, kneeling in the frozen soil, examining the dormant rose bushes his mother had planted. "These need pruning," she said when he appeared. "They'll come back in spring, but only if someone cuts back the dead wood now." He handed her the garden shears from the shed without being asked, and she took them without thanking him, and they worked in parallel silence for an hour. She on the roses, he clearing dead leaves from the beds, and neither of them mentioned that this was the longest they had been in the same space, without speaking or fleeing. A night where he heard music from the guest room, soft, barely audible through the wall. Ella Fitzgerald, a voice like honey, poured slow. He stood in the hallway and recognized the song. "Someone to Watch Over Me." Callum had played it on their mother's record player at the reception after their wedding, and Vivian had laughed and called it sentimental, and then danced to it with her shoes off. Rafferty pressed his forehead against the wall and stayed there until the song ended. The confrontation came on a Sunday. It was late January. A snowstorm had locked the city down, and the house was quieter than usual. Nora had gone to her sister's for the weekend. Petrov was snowed in at his apartment in Gowanus. It was just the two of them, sealed in by weather and silence. Vivian had been in the study. Yeah, she had been reading, Not Chekhov this time, but something she had found in the bottom drawer of the desk. A notebook, leather-bound, old, with Rafferty's handwriting inside. She came into the kitchen holding it. Rafferty was making pasta, simple, mechanical work. Boil water, chop garlic, open a jar of sauce. He had his sleeves rolled to the elbow and a dish towel over his shoulder, and he looked, for a moment, like a man who was not dangerous. "What is this?" she said. He turned. He saw the notebook. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes sealed shut, the way a vault door closes. "Where did you find that?" "Bottom drawer of your desk. It wasn't locked." "I didn't say it was locked. I asked where you found it. And I told you. Now I'm asking what it is." He turned off the burner. He set the dish towel on the counter. He looked at the notebook in her hands, and the silence in the kitchen was the silence of a room that is about to contain something that cannot be taken back. "It's a journal," he said. "I wrote it. The year Callum died." Vivian opened it. She had clearly already read parts of it. Her hands went to specific pages with the muscle memory of someone who has read and reread. "You wrote about the negotiation," she said. Her voice was very even, very controlled, and that was how Rafferty knew she was close to breaking. She was calmest when she was closest to destruction. "The Pavlovich deal, the 3 waterfront blocks." "Yes. You wrote that you refused to concede, that your advisors told you it was the only strategic option, that capitulation would have cost more lives in the aggregate." "Yes. You wrote that you knew, when you refused, that there was a chance they would escalate." "Yes. A chance they would kill him." The clock ticked. The pot on the stove hissed softly, with residual heat. "Yes." Vivian closed the notebook. She held it against her chest, pressing the leather into her sternum, and her eyes were bright and terrible. "You knew," she said. "You knew they might kill him, and you let them." "I didn't let them. I tried to get him back. I mobilized everything I had." "After you refused?" "After I refused." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because telling you would have meant admitting that I weighed my brother's life against a business calculation, and my brother lost." The words hung in the kitchen like smoke. Vivian stared at him. He stared back. Neither of them moved. "You could have given them what they wanted," she whispered. "I know. 3 blocks and a contract, $12 million. That's what Callum was worth to you. That's what I told myself it wasn't about. But you're right, that's what it came down to. And then you called me. And you said he was dead. And you said the people responsible would be dealt with. And you never told me that the person most responsible was you." Rafferty absorbed the blow. He did not flinch. He did not defend, or explain, or contextualize. He stood in his kitchen with his sleeves rolled up and his brother's blood on his ledger, and let the woman his brother had loved say the truest thing anyone had ever said to him. "You're right," he said. "That's it? That's all you have? What do you want me to say, Vivian? That I made the wrong call? I made the wrong call. That I've spent 4 years knowing it. I've spent 4 years knowing it. That I wake up at 3 in the morning and lie in the dark and calculate what those blocks are worth now and divide it by my brother's life. I do that. Every night." His voice had risen, not to a shout, but to something raw and cracked, the sound of a man who has been holding a wall and has just felt the first breach. His hands were flat on the counter, and the tendons in his forearms stood out like cables, and his breath was uneven. "I cannot fix this," he said. "I cannot bring him back. I cannot unmake the decision. I can tell you that I have not slept through the night since he died. I can tell you that I have replayed that negotiation 10,000 times, and in every replay I make a different choice, and he comes home, and you are not sitting on a sidewalk in December. But I cannot give you those replays. I can only give you this. What's in front of you, this house, this room, the fact that I found you and I am trying, too late, to do the one thing I should have done 4 years ago." Vivian was crying, not dramatically. No sobs, no sounds, just tears, tracking down her face in parallel lines, falling off her jaw. She held the notebook against her chest, and the tears fell on its leather cover, and she made no move to wipe them. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. From the beginning. Before the funeral. Before I stood in that church and mourned him without understanding what I was mourning." I know. I mourned a random act of violence, a wrong place, wrong time tragedy. I mourned something meaningless, and the whole time it had meaning. It had a reason. It had a name. Yours. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet. Yes, he said. The snowstorm raged outside. The kitchen light hummed. Two people stood on opposite sides of a counter, with 4 years of grief and truth between them, and neither of them knew what happened next. Vivienne set the notebook on the table. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She pulled out a chair and sat down. "Make the pasta," she said. "What?" "You are making pasta. Finish it." He looked at her. She looked at him. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but an acknowledgement that they were both still here, in this room, and that the truth had been spoken and the walls had not fallen down. He turned the burner back on. They ate in silence. The pasta was overcooked because he had left the water boiling too long during the conversation, and the sauce was from a jar, and neither of them commented on the quality, because the quality was not the point. The point was that they were eating together, at the same table, after the worst thing had been said, and neither of them had left. After dinner, Vivienne picked up the notebook and held it out to him. "Keep it," he said. "I don't need it anymore." "Why?" "Because you know now. Everything in those pages that you know it. The notebook was where I kept the truth when I couldn't say it. You're the only person I've said it to." She looked at the notebook. She looked at him. She put it in the pocket of the sweater Nora had given her, an oversized thing, dark green wool, with pockets big enough to carry a man's confession. "Good night, Rafferty." "Good night, Vivienne." She went upstairs. He washed the dishes. The hot water ran over his hands, and he watched it pool in the sink, and he breathed, slowly, the way you breathe when you have been holding your breath for 4 years, and have finally, painfully, let it out. Something shifted after that night. Not dramatically, not in grand gestures, or tearful reconciliations. The shift was geological, slow, deep, measured in millimeters. But it was there. Vivienne stopped retreating. When Rafferty entered a room, she did not move toward him, but she stopped moving away, and in the grammar of their coexistence, that absence of retreat was a sentence that said more than words. She started leaving things in common spaces, a scarf on the back of the couch, a half-finished cup of tea on the study desk, the check-off open and face down on the arm of the reading chair, small territorial markers, not the claim of ownership, but the admission that she was here and was not, for the moment, planning to leave. Rafferty noticed everything he was trained to notice. In his world, details were currency, and missing one could cost you your life. But noticing Vivienne was different from noticing a threat. It was softer, and it hurt more. He noticed that she drank tea with honey but no milk. He noticed that she read with her feet, curled under her. He noticed that she touched her collarbone when she was thinking, a small gesture, unconscious, as if checking that her heart was still there. He noticed that she had begun to gain weight, her cheeks filling slightly, the shadows under her eyes fading, and that the change made her look not healthier, exactly, but more present, more solid in the space she occupied. He noticed that she watched him, too. Not obviously, not the way she had watched him in the early days, with suspicion and distance. This was something else. Glances when she thought he was not looking, moments where her eyes rested on him during the quiet intervals of an evening, and then moved away when he turned his head. He caught these glances the way you catch light on water, briefly, indirectly, knowing that looking straight at it would make it disappear. February came. The roses Vivienne had pruned began to show the first signs of life. Tiny red buds at the tips of the canes, bigger than match heads. She checked them every morning, kneeling in the cold garden with a concentration that Rafferty found almost sacred, as if she were monitoring a promise that the world had made, and she was not yet sure it would keep. One morning he brought her a pair of gardening gloves. Good ones, leather, lined, the kind that cost money. He set them on the garden bench and went back inside without saying anything. She wore them the next morning. She did not mention them. But when she came in from the garden, her hands were warm, and she poured him a cup of coffee without being asked. And the exchange, gloves for coffee, warmth for warmth, was the closest thing to tenderness either of them had allowed. The conversation that changed things happened in the study on a night in mid-February when the radiator was clanking, and Rafferty was pretending to read a financial report. Vivian was in the reading chair with the Chekhov. She had started it over from the beginning, which told Rafferty that she was reading it for comfort rather than content. She had her feet curled under her. The lamp beside her cast a warm circle that ended at the edge of his desk, and the two of them occupied their separate pools of light like islands in the same body of water. "Why didn't Callum ever talk about you?" she said. Rafferty looked up. "He didn't? He talked about the family. He talked about your father, your mother, the business. But when I asked about you specifically, what you were like, what your relationship was, he'd changed the subject. We weren't close. Brothers in a crime family aren't close. Brothers in a crime family are complicated. Callum was the one who wanted out. I was the one who stayed. That created a distance that neither of us knew how to close. Did you want to close it?" He set the report down. "I wanted him to be safe. I told myself that was the same thing. It wasn't. No. Did you love him?" The question was simple, and it landed like a stone in still water. "He was my brother." "That's not what I asked." Rafferty looked at the desk, his father's desk, the desk where decisions were made, and their consequences were filed away in drawers that never quite closed all the way. "I loved him," he said. "I didn't know how to show it in a way he could recognize. Everything I did, the distance, the protection, even the decision that killed him. I told myself it was love. But love that the other person can't feel isn't love. It's just strategy." Vivian was quiet for a long time. The radiator clanked. A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling. "He loved you too," she said. "He never said it. But he kept a photograph of the two of you in his nightstand. You were children in it, 7, maybe 8, standing in front of this house. You had your arm around his shoulder." Rafferty's throat tightened. He knew the photograph. He had an identical copy in his bedroom, in a frame that sat on his dresser, face down, because looking at it was a luxury he did not allow himself. "I remember the day that was taken," he said. "It was Easter. Our mother made us wear matching suits. Callum hated it. He kept pulling at his collar. He always pulled at collars. He did it at our wedding. I remember. You were there. Back row. I didn't stay for the reception. I know. I looked for you." The admission settled between them like a third presence. She had looked for him. At her wedding to his brother, she had looked for him. "Why?" he asked. "Because Callum said you wouldn't come, and I wanted him to be wrong. I wanted his family to be whole for one day." "I'm sorry. You say that a lot. I mean it a lot." Another silence, but this one was different from all the silences that had come before. This one was full, not of things unsaid, but of things that had been said and were settling into place, like furniture being arranged in a room that was finally being used. Vivienne uncurled her feet and stood. She crossed the room and stopped at the edge of his desk. She was close enough that he could see the faint pattern of the knit in her sweater, the tiny scar on her left eyebrow that she had told Nora she got from falling off a swing at age 9. She reached into the pocket of the green sweater and took out the journal. She placed it on the desk, in front of him. "I've read it 3 times, she said. "Every page, every entry. I know, the spine is cracked at the March pages. The March entries are the worst. They were the hardest to write." She put her hand on the journal. Her fingers were inches from his, both of them touching the leather cover, the book that held the truth between its pages like pressed flowers. "I'm not ready to forgive you," she said. "I may never be ready. But I understand now that what happened to Callum didn't happen because you didn't care. It happened because you cared about the wrong things. And that's not the same as not caring. Is that better or worse? I haven't decided." She pulled her hand back. "Good night, Rafferty. Good night, Vivian." She left. He sat at his desk and placed his hand where hers had been, on the journal, and the leather was warm from her touch. March arrived like an exhale. The roses bloomed, not dramatically. 3 buds, then 5, then 7, small red fists uncurling into something soft. Vivian tended them every morning with the leather gloves and a focus that bordered on devotion. The garden, which had been dead ground for years, began to show signs of life beyond the roses. Crocuses pushing through the soil, the dogwood beginning to bud. Inside the house, the geography had changed. Vivian no longer sat in the chair closest to the door. She sat in the chair closest to the window, the one that caught the morning light, the one Nora said had been Rafferty's mother's favorite. She left her shoes by the back. She hung her coat on the hook by the kitchen entrance. The cardboard she had carried from Atlantic Avenue was gone. Rafferty did not know when she had discarded it, but its absence felt significant. The shedding of a survival tool that was no longer needed. They ate dinner together now. Not every night, but most. Nora cooked, and the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table, and the conversation was sometimes about nothing. The weather, a book, whether the deli on the corner made a decent sandwich, and sometimes about everything, delivered in small, careful doses that both of them could absorb. One night, Vivian laughed. Actually laughed. Nora had told a story about a plumber who had come to fix the kitchen sink and spent the entire visit trying to explain cryptocurrency, and Vivian laughed, a real sound, full-bodied, unguarded, and Rafferty felt something inside his chest crack, not painfully, but the way a shell cracks when something alive is pushing through. He looked at her across the table, and she was still laughing, and the light was on her face, and for one uncontrolled moment, he allowed himself to see her, not as his brother's widow, not as the woman he had failed, not as a debt or an obligation, but as herself. A woman who was intelligent and guarded and stubborn and kind and broken in ways that matched his own fractures, and who was sitting at his table, in his mother's chair, laughing at a plumber story, and who was, against every reasonable expectation, still here. She caught him looking. The laughter faded, but not entirely. A trace of it stayed in her eyes, and what he saw there was not the flat hostility of the first days, or the wary distance of the second week, but something more complicated. Recognition. The acknowledgement that something was happening between them, that neither of them had asked for, and neither of them knew how to stop. She looked away first. The first touch happened by accident. They were in the garden. It was late March. The roses were in full bloom, deep red, heavy-headed, improbable. Vivian was cutting one, holding the stem with her left hand and working the shears with her right, and a thorn caught her through the glove and she flinched. "Let me see," Rafferty said. He was beside her before the words were finished. He took her hand, not gently, not tenderly, but with the practical urgency of someone assessing damage, and turned it over. A bead of blood was welling through the leather at the base of her thumb. "It's nothing," she said. "Take off the glove." She pulled the glove off. The thorn had gone deep enough to draw a steady trickle, and the blood was running down her wrist. Rafferty pulled the handkerchief from his jacket pocket, white, monogrammed, the kind of thing his father had carried, and pressed it against the wound. "Hold pressure," he said. "I know how to stop bleeding, Rafferty." "Then hold pressure." She held pressure. He did not let go of her hand. They stood like that in the garden, his fingers wrapped around her wrist, the handkerchief between them, growing slowly red, and the intimacy of the moment was so sudden and so raw that neither of them knew how to end it. "You can let go," she said. He let go. She kept the handkerchief pressed to her thumb. She looked at the rose she had been cutting. It had fallen to the ground, and its petals were scattered in the soil like drops of blood. "You grew those," Rafferty said. "You brought them back. Your mother planted them. I just cut back the dead parts." "That's the same thing." She looked at him. The afternoon light was behind her, and her hair was loose, and there was blood on her hand, and dirt on her knees, and a rose at her feet. And she was the most present, the most alive, the most devastating thing he had ever seen. "Rafferty," she said. "Yes. What are we doing?" He knew what she was asking. Not about the garden, not about the arrangement. She was asking about the thing that had been building between them since the night in the kitchen, the thing that lived in the glances and the silences and the coffee poured without asking, and the hand held in a garden. "I don't know," he said, and for the first time in his life, the admission of ignorance did not feel like weakness. It felt like the only honest thing available. "I can't," she said. "You know I can't." "I know. He was your brother. I know. And I was his wife. I know, Vivian." She closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were clear. "But I don't want to leave," she said. "Then don't." She stood there with blood on her hand and truth in her eyes. And then she bent down and picked up the fallen rose and carried it inside. And Rafferty stayed in the garden and looked at the spot where her knees had pressed the earth, and the imprint remained, proof of her presence, evidence that this was real. It was April when she came to his study and closed the door behind her. He was at the desk, working, genuinely working, not the pretend reading of months ago. He was reviewing construction bids, and his reading glasses were on, and the lamp was doing its pool of light thing, and the room smelled like old wood and paper. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and then she crossed the room and sat in the chair across from his desk. The chair where associates sat, where people came to ask for things and give reports and negotiate terms. She sat in it like she was here on business. "I've made a decision," she said. He took off his glasses. He set down his pen. "I'm going to get a job," she said. "Nora told me about a used bookshop on Fifth Avenue that's hiring. I have experience. I managed inventory at the bookshop in Park Slope when Callum was alive. I'm going to apply." "All right. I'm going to find an apartment. Something small, something mine. All right. I'm going to leave this house. I'm going to leave." A silence. The clock ticked. The radiator clanked. "All right," he said. But the word landed differently this time, heavier, with a weight that even his practiced control could not disguise. "I need you to understand why," she said. "You don't owe me an explanation. I'm not giving you one because I owe you. I'm giving you one because you deserve to hear it." He waited. "I came here because I was starving. I stayed because I was healing. And now I need to leave, because if I stay much longer, I'm going to start needing you, and I cannot need you, Rafferty. Not because of Callum, not because of the past, but because I have spent 4 years needing no one, and I have to know that I can stand on my own before I can stand next to anyone else." She paused. She touched her collarbone, that gesture, the one he had memorized. "Even you," she said, "especially you." He looked at her across the desk, this woman who had arrived on cardboard and was leaving on her feet. This woman who had survived poverty and grief and betrayal and had come out the other side not whole, not yet, but intact. Functional. Choosing. "You'll always have a place here," he said. "That's not a condition. That's a fact." "I know." "And the garden." "I'll come back for the roses," she said. "They need someone." "So do I," he said very quietly. And the words came out before he could stop them, and he watched them land on her face and saw the impact, saw the way her eyes widened and then softened, and then held steady. "I know," she said. "That's the other reason I have to go." She stood. She came around the desk. She stood in front of him, close enough that he could see the scar on her eyebrow, the faint line where the thorn had healed on her thumb. She bent down and kissed him. Once, on the forehead, where the gray hair started, a kiss that was not romantic, not passionate, but something older and more complex. A benediction, a boundary, a door left open. You, she said, for the room, for the food, for the truth." "Thank you," he said, for staying long enough to hear it. She left that afternoon. She took the green sweater, the check-off, and the journal. She left the gardening gloves on the bench in the garden. The bookshop hired her. She found an apartment, a studio on 3rd Avenue, small, with a window that got morning light. She worked, she read, She rebuilt, piece by piece, the architecture of a life. Rafferty did not call. He did not visit. He did not send flowers, or money, or protection details. He did what she had asked, which was to let her stand on her own. And it was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the Pavlovich negotiation, harder than the phone call, harder than any night at 3 a.m, calculating the cost of his decisions. But every Saturday he went to the garden and checked the roses, and every Saturday he found them tended, the dead heads removed, the soil turned, the canes tied to their supports. She came when he was not there. She kept her promise. He kept his. In June, on a Saturday, he went to the garden and found something on the bench beside the gloves she had left behind. A book, new, with a bookshop sticker on the spine. It was Chekhov, not the same collection, but a different one, a volume of letters. Inside the front cover, in handwriting he recognized, she had written, "For R. These are better than the stories. In the letters, he tells the truth. V." He sat on the bench and held the book and looked at the roses, full, red, alive, and at the garden his mother had planted, and his brother's wife had saved, and he understood that this was not an ending. It was an interval, the kind of rest between movements in a piece of music, where the silence holds everything that came before and everything that is coming, and you sit in it, and you breathe, and you wait, because you know in the way that matters, in the body, in the blood, as that the music is not finished. It has just begun.